Alrighty, everyone. Good morning. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I know it's been quite a while since we've created a new YouTube video here. The intention of this YouTube video is to try and now create a consistent pace of YouTube videos where we will be covering lots of different important topics for your DSE examination. If you would like to reach out to me for any specific notes, any specific analysis that you would like to be made on YouTube, or if you would like to have either a one-on-one or maybe even a group session online of tutoring, feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to respond to anyone's requests, concerns, or thoughts. My email address can be obtained right here. If by any chance my handwriting seems to be unclear to you, you would be able to access this in the captions below as well. So on your screen today, we will be covering different types of questions that you might be able to see in your DSE exam. These are a few more common questions that I've been able to kind of pick out from the past papers of the DSE examination. Please note that if you're new to this channel covers the HKDSE syllabus as well as the IGCSE literature syllabus. I do not teach GCEs, so if that's something you're aiming for, I would recommend you to mention it down in the comment section below. Reach out to me on my email address and let me know what your syllabus kind of looks like and what specific literatures you would like me to cover in this YouTube channel as well. Alrighty, so this is kind of the syllabus for 2025 HKDSE Literature and English students. For my students itself, we've been covering the blue highlighted parts. Now, when we talk about our novel, plays, and films, you could choose either or. So you could pick Rebecca, or you could pick the latter, or you could pick Educating Rita, or you could pick the other one, right? So these top three categories allows you to pick whatever you would like to have. There's no kind of restriction happening there. The reason why I've picked the ones I've picked is because I just feel like those are kind of my areas of forte, so I'm able to perform a better analysis on them because I've read those literatures myself previously. The other ones, the ones that are labeled as 2, are also other alternative literatures or maybe the primary literature that your institution have been covering. If you end up taking some tutoring sessions with me before your DSE examination, make sure you do let me know what your syllabus looks like, right? So what set texts have your institution or either your professors or teachers have picked for you, or things that you've covered in class. All right, so different types of questions, right? So what are different types of questions? One of the most popular types of questions you will see, whether it be in your unseen poetry of your paper 2, or maybe just the poetry section of paper 2, question 2, they could ask you to comment on different poetic techniques, right? So the Chimney Sweeper is just an example of one poem. There could be many variety of different poems. When we say poetic devices, we are not limiting ourselves to things like metaphor, simile, onomatopoeia, right? So we're taking this a step beyond. It could be, well, yes, it could be simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, alliteration. But let's go a step further, right? Like what, or maybe repetition. It could be what types of repetition do we know of, right? If you say imagery, what types of imagery do we know about? We know visual, olfactory, tactory, right? Those are a few things we know of. If you say alliteration, is it sibilants? Is it plosive sounds? What type of sounds are we talking about? If it's repetition, are we talking about epizixes? Or are we talking about anaphora? So there are lots of different poetic devices, but to make sure that you've marked the correct poetic device comes with a lot of practice. So what I recommend doing is looking at different unseen poetries, trying to look into them, read through them, and then look into any of the questions that have been mentioned in the slide, or maybe any of the questions that I've been giving you if you take some tutoring sessions with me. Try and imagine what would your respond look like and how would it differ for different types of poems. And that's why I recommend unseen poetry, because you've never really seen that poetry before. So it just gives you that opportunity to work around with things. The second part of this is the main theme, right? So they could ask you, hey, what is the main theme? And main theme generally refers to the concept of central idea, right? Okay, and then here you would see in question B, they said, what is the role of two starlings in the poem? So we are picking a specific quote. Now, depending on your poem, this could vary. It could be maybe what is the role of, let's say, the tree in the poem, right? Like we have a poison tree. What's the role of that? And that you can easily write down so many pages because there's so much you can talk about the tree, right? You can talk about the leaves, the branches, the fact that, it depends on the poem in itself. 2C is commenting on the poem's use of sound, right? So considering different types of sound. Now, when we say repetition, we don't only limit it to repetition, right? There's anticlauses, there's anaphora, there is epizixes, there's so many different things, right? And then the third type of question they could also ask, what's the poem about, right? And they ask you what the poem is about. Don't forget to mention down who the characters are, what is the background or setting of where and when the story was set. Don't forget the main idea plus ending. And all of this, you can write it super easily in one paragraph, right? So that should be the aim. Now, if they ask you about the form of the poem, you can consider talking about, if you know and if you correctly can identify the actual name of that form of poem, that's perfect, For example, we have something called villanelle, which is specifically, if you read a poem called Do Not Go Gentle into that good night, you would be able to see that specific poem has a form, and that form is called a villanelle. Okay, and then the 3C we have, how are the actions of the bird and the speaker connected? So in that sense, it depends on, who the characters are. In our case here, it seems like the bird and the speakers are characters, but if the characters do increase, you can say, how are they connected? How are they connected in terms of communication? Maybe in terms of real life, maybe in terms of the perspectives between the two characters. And then this one, number 4, is very similar to number 1, but the reason why I have it here is to show you the different wordings, right? So literary technique, poetic devices, they all technically refer to the same element, okay? More questions could be asked. For example, comment on how does afterwards depicts the theme of death, right? So they could change the name of the poem, and they can change to different theme name. Okay, next question is, how does Walter Mitty utilize imagination to bring perspective to characters, right? So you can think about that. So consider, how does he use imagination? What does he do to bring perspective, right? So for instance, he dreams of a girl, right, falling into his arms at the courtroom. So it symbolizes and it shows that he utilizes his imagination to bring a kind of romantic feel to his character, to make him feel stronger. We have so many different types of dreams that he's been seeing, right? So that's kind of the gist of it. And yes, so then you have the bottom few ones as well, which is very similar to the previous ones that we've been talking about. Now the question comes, how do you actually answer these questions, right? So the first step I always recommend students is finding out what are the keywords, right? So picking out, hey, what is the keyword? Now, when you're doing your paper 2, question 2, all those poems that you see are poems that you know about, right? So obviously you would know about your partner, you would know about everything. So the concept here that I'm trying to highlight is first of all, it is extremely important to have your definition. After your definition, you can talk about, anything else. For example, you can talk a little bit about the poet's background, right? So you can share a little bit of that in the first paragraph. So those are a couple of examples for you to kind of consider, just as an example. So by taking a look at this structure, we kind of have a clear concept, right? So we've looked into the concept of how we can start an introduction paragraph, but then looking into, body paragraphs, those are kind of the way that you would structure your responses. For instance, if we're looking at paragraph number 1, we would specifically want a point with an example. Now, what we've done kind of here is for your body paragraphs, you could even have 1-point paragraph with the 2 examples inside it. You could have a 2-point paragraph like as 1 paragraph and have examples 3 and 4 inside, right? So it depends solely on your design, the amount of points that you have and what you feel is right in the situation in itself. And yes, so I would recommend that way. Okay, so that's the concept. Then we will look into another question type is how does Walter Mitty utilize imagination to bring perspective to his character? So he makes use of imagination, which you can actually notice is kind of like throughout the entire story. And how does he bring perspective to character? So when we say perspective, right, so there's so many things you can think about, like his personal emotions, right? Perspectives to his character, for example, happiness, right? It could be romance, could be overwhelming work. So it could be a couple of those things, right? And then so I've also mentioned when you talk about perspective, it could be different types of emotions that a human goes through. For example, depression, joy, thoughtful, romantic, workaholic. Those are different types of shades. Roles as a human being, so you could be a husband, wife, son, human being, the world. So those are some examples of what we would think about when we see the word perspective or point of view of a character, right? Now, because the question says how, right? So we're looking for methods specifically. So that is kind of, if you read through the slide, it gives you a good impression of what is to expect. Okay, similarly, you would notice the same thing for another question here, which is how does the poet express suffering effectively? Scrolling down, you would see how does Walter Mitty gain insight into himself? Some types of poem questions, right? So what is the poem about? What is the form of the poem? How are actions of the bird and the speaker connected? So that's specifically looking into the poem called calling the poem in itself. You would be able to see that, right? And this is one of the very last questions where we're kind of covering the idea of mood, and I'm going to leave that here on the slide for you that you can pause and watch it afterwards. So with that being said, this is basically all from me. I tried to keep it very short and simple. I will give more detailed explanation in my next YouTube video, but for now I'm keeping it very short and concise to kind of bring back everybody together as a collective to kind of build through this trust and thought process as well. So with that being said, we're just going to end for today, and if you have any questions, let me know.